In the geography capstone course led by Professor Terry Ann Lavin, we completed our research titled The Ogallala Aquifer, examining the process of depletion resulting from governmental and economic policies. This research was completed by Matthew Fesman, Parker Halling, Jack Hart, Sam Prusak, Izzy Radley, Cameron Zur, and myself, Gretchen Snyder. My contribution to our project defines the what, where, and why. The Ogallala Aquifer lies under 8 states in the Great Plains: Kansas, Colorado, Nebraska, New Mexico, Oklahoma, South Dakota, Texas, and Wyoming. According to a Kansas University study, the water volume in the Ogallala Aquifer are estimated to amount to 3.3 billion acre feet of water, more than enough to fill all of Lake Huron and a half of Lake Erie. 30% of irrigated land in the United States is watered using the Ogallala, and 27% overlies the aquifer. Within this region, agriculture is one of the primary economic activities, which the aquifer contributes around $35 billion to. In order to sustain significant agricultural activities, vast amounts of water are pumped from the aquifer. In 1975, the overdraft equaled the flow of the Colorado River. Currently, the Ogallala Aquifer is being depleted at an annual volume equal to 18 Colorado rivers. This, in part, along with the flawed economic and governmental policies, has led to significant depletion of the aquifer and has put the aquifer in jeopardy of running out.
My contribution to our project explores the pre-colonial and colonial Western Great Plains. Pre-colonization, indigenous people in Western Kansas lived with the land, taking only what they needed. But in the 1800s, the US government created official policies to forcibly remove the original inhabitants, the indigenous people, and to drive the bison to extinction. Two policies were the Indian Removal Act of 1830 and the Homestead Act of 1862. These privatized the now uninhabited land encompassing the Great Plains, allowing agriculture to rapidly develop. Overdevelopment and years of drought led to the Dust Bowl in the 1930s. Though the aquifer was discovered in 1889, it wasn't until post-World War II technology of pivot irrigation that allowed for its extraction. Corporations took notice of this opportunity through purchasing properties and moving onto the land, which became a large factor in the changing landscape of agricultural land in Kansas. The first policy to restrict corporate farming within the Kansas borders was implemented in 1931. This policy prohibited corporate farmers from growing water-intensive crops. However, loopholes made it possible for certain types of corporations, which met detailed specifications, to engage in agricultural production of those restricted crops. In 2012, Kansas passed a statute to eliminate these loopholes, but so far, corporate loopholes can still be found.
My contribution to our project explores U.S. policies regarding water use and agriculture in the early to mid 1900s. Beginning under FDR and the New Deal in 1933, federal farm subsidies were introduced and became an integral aspect of the United States agriculture industry. However, it was not until the 1950s under Agricultural Commissioner Earl Butz that the mindset of the U.S. agriculture changed by shifting from a sustainable grow what you need philosophy to a maximalist perspective, encouraging extreme crop surplus. This further drove corporate interest and was institutionalized by focusing on commodity water-intensive crops. In conjunction to the Kansas Water Appropriations Act of 1945, the exploitation of the Ogallala region began due to the explosion of wide-scale farming.
My contribution to our project explores the 1945 Kansas Water Appropriations Act. Kansas made the switch from riparianism to prior appropriation in 1945 with the Kansas Water Appropriations Act. Now, instead of water being equally owned by nearby landowners, the first to use the water has senior rights. Prior appropriation is ruled by the principle of first in time, first in right. These ideas of governing water likely stem from fear among Western states, where water is scarce, versus Eastern states, where prior appropriation is less common and water is a more abundant resource. In fact, under prior appropriation, water rights can be sold. In practice, this means that even if a waterway ran through your land, you may not even have the right to use it. Despite regulation of prior appropriation being inconsistent, this concept of water law held up in court during the case of Williams versus the City of Wichita.
Additionally, today, almost 80% of the nation's irrigated crop revenue comes from non-grain crops, vegetables, orchards, cottons, and horticulture. However, in the Ogallala region, that value is reversed, with about 80% of the irrigated crop sales coming from water-intensive grains, such as corn, soybean, and wheat. Due to the significant reassurance of federal government farm subsidies for these specific water-intensive crops, there is a financial interest in continuing farming on a large scale, and as well as a broken knowledge loop fueled by money. Through technological subsidies, the government has made strides towards more sustainable practices. However, in practice, the water efficient nature of these technologies and their implementation are being used to exploit more water by expanding cropland.
This contribution to our project explores the relationship between municipalities and corporate water use in Kansas. Many smaller townships and communities rely on the Ogallala Aquifer as a primary water source. And this study looks at the largest municipalities in Kansas affected by the issue, the resources they get from the aquifer itself, and the potential outcomes if this water source evaporates. For example, from 2005 to 2017, the city of Hutchinson, Kansas, on average relied on 7,615 acre-feet of water to sustain their population. By comparison, Wheatland Electric Co-op averaged a staggering 29,549 acre-feet, which is more than 4 times the amount of water used than Hutchinson, with a population of over 40,000 on a yearly basis. And as we continue to deplete this vital resource, the effects will negatively impact millions of individuals, not only in Kansas, but in the entire Midwest region. And my contribution to our project explores the present-day view of the aquifer. In 1972, Kansas created Groundwater Management Districts, which divided groundwater resources of the state into 5 different management areas, with the idea being to allow local stakeholders to decide how to manage their portion of the aquifer rather than lawmakers in Topeka. Groundwater management districts play a huge role in conservation of the aquifer. A district could curtail pumping allotments in the same way it could increase them. And along these lines, some success has been found with the introduction of the local enhanced management areas, otherwise known as LEMAs, a community-based structural approach to reducing aquifer usage. One example of this success is the Sheridan 6 LEMA, located in northwestern Kansas. Local farmers collectively set pumping restrictions, and water usage decreased dramatically, seeing percentage reductions in pumping significantly higher than the 20% that was initially mandated by the LEMA. And this shows promise. A 20% reduction in water usage extends the lifespan of the aquifer by decades and still manages to have minimal economic impacts.
My contribution to our project explores the present day and the local view of the aquifer. I explored the use of groundwater in Western Kansas by talking to the people that I knew. My initial conversation was with a 4th-generation cattle rancher from Western Kansas, whose family pumped water for cattle from a finger of the Ogallala. They don't grow crops that require a lot of water because the irrigation equipment is too expensive. People who grow corn almost always pump. When asked if he thinks that there's an issue with the way groundwater is pumped today, he explained how the farmers in his town don't pump, but the farmers north of them do, so it is difficult for him to say. He does experience the depletion of the aquifer during the winter months because the finger drops in water level and becomes mostly dry. I asked if he is at all concerned with the potential depletion of the aquifer. He responded with yes, but in the long term. Regarding large farming corporations, he thinks they really wouldn't care too much if the aquifer runs dry. The corporate farmers use the aquifer for their crops so they can feed the people, as in us, and therefore the aquifer served its purpose. He did seem fairly open to new ideas, and this does bring a degree of hope.
Though legislation can be put in place to increase sustainability in the Ogallala Aquifer, it may not be effective if only one state passes limiting legislation. Unfortunately, federal legislation takes years to pass, so states having their own autonomy can potentially accelerate the process. To have the largest impact, states will need to collaborate and instill similar policies. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.